the Oxford College Literature, Arts, and Lecture Series. I'm really glad to see you all here today. It's a really important event. This is the flyer of what has been happening this whole semester. We have a mailing list out there, so if you're here for the first time, or even if it's not the first time, if you're not on my mailing list, get on it, and I will send you an email, flyer, or snail mail, whichever you prefer, and you'll find out what's going on next semester. We have one more event in our series, and there's a flyer on that. It's called Life Through the Lens of the Elizabethans. And the Student Honor Society hosts this event. Every semester we close the series with that. So it should be a really good one as well. For your information, you can see people doing videotaping, KTV. I have the card over here if anybody wants it. They're in the back. They'll be streamed tomorrow. Come on in. So, I have made a commitment to myself and to this college to have a Holocaust survivor come every single year around the time of Yom HaShoah, which is the commemoration of the Holocaust. Every year there is a commemoration, and we need to be able to hear these stories while we still have them. It's just really important to know what hatred can do to people. And these are very brave people who have survived and want to come and tell us about it. So Renee Firestone was born in Czechoslovakia, and I'm not going to say the city because I'll mess it up. I can't pronounce it, but she was born in Czechoslovakia. She was imprisoned in Auschwitz-Birkenau for 13 months. She was 20, which is probably why she survived. When you were really young, really old, it was harder. She's a founding lecturer for the Simon Wiesenthal Center Educational Outreach Program. She's a trainer, interviewer, and educator with Steven Spielberg's Survivors of the Shoah Visual Histories Foundation, and was featured in the film The Last Days, which received the 1998 Academy Award for Best Feature-Length Documentary. She was also featured in the documentary Swimming in Auschwitz and appeared in a cameo role in Freedom Riders. Renee received the Elie Wiesel Holocaust Remembrance Medal and the Golden Mayer Award, and was granted the first ever honorary PhD in Educational Justice from the University of Redlands. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
A lovely audience. But before, my name is Renee, as you heard, and I'm a Holocaust survivor. And I'm just curious, how many of you know anything about the Holocaust? Oh, great. Well, I hope you learned something today that you didn't learn or didn't hear before. I was born and raised, as you heard, in a country called Czechoslovakia, which doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately. I am sure you don't know that this country was created with the help of the United States. Before World War I, we had two Czech professors at the Chicago University, and they found out after World War I that the European borders are changing and the countries are separating themselves, because before World War I, Middle Europe was one country called Austro-Hungarian monarchy, which tells you that Austria and Hungary were the two major rulers. But after World War I, all these other countries wanted to have their own borders. And these two Czech professors in Chicago found out. One was called, anybody knows this, who I'm talking about? They became presidents of Czechoslovakia later. Nobody. Well, one of them was called Thomas Masaryk, and the other one was Edward Benish. And Masaryk already had an American wife. And when they found out that the borders are changing, they decided they wanted to have their own country also. So with the help of the United States, of course, they went back and created this strip of land which was in the very heart of Europe. If you ever find an old map of Czechoslovakia, you will see that this is the only country that ran through Europe and bordered with every country in Europe, which was not an easy task, and maybe that's why it doesn't exist anymore. Anyway, I was born on this country, as I said, was a long strip of land which bordered on the west with Germany and ran all through Europe, bordering with Poland, with Austria, with Hungary, with Romania, and all the way to the borders on the east, bordering with the Soviet Union at that time. Today, of course, that doesn't exist either, and now it is the borders with the Ukraine. Anyway, I was raised in this country very much like any American child is born. The country was modeled and planned very similarly as the United States. It was the most progressive country in Europe. It was the first country in Europe where you could buy ready-made clothes or ready-made shoes, which of course didn't exist before World War I. And I was, as I said, very lucky to be born in this country. I was born in the very eastern region, which was, as I said, bordering partially with Poland, with Hungary, and with the Soviet Union. And the capital of this region was called Uzhhorod, which she couldn't pronounce. Okay. And my father had a beautiful home in this city and a very lucrative textile and tailoring business. And I had a brother who was 5 years older than me, and I had a little sister who was 4.5 years younger than me. My brother's name was Frank, my sister was Clara. And as I said, we grew up very much like any American child. At summertime, we had all the fun, swimming, playing tennis. At winter, we were under the Carpathian Mountains, so everybody skied and skated, and we had beautiful winters. Everything was fine up till 1938. But before 1938, in 1937, my father had papers to come to the United States. My mother absolutely refused to come. She couldn't understand why my father wants to uproot the family, take her to a country where she doesn't speak the language, where they don't have an income. She just couldn't imagine why my father would do that. And so they decided not to come. And the rest, of course, is history. But long before that, in 1933, a man appeared on the political scene whose name was Adolf Hitler. Nobody knew where he came from, who he was, what he is for. And in 1933, he was elected Chancellor of Germany. People were wondering, how did this happen? He wasn't a German, he was an Austrian. So these were the questions. Who is he? What is he going to do? Well, very soon we realized what he's going to do. He had an obsession against the Jewish people. And the very first thing he approached was the Jews and the Jewish question. And we kept hearing stories about the Jewish people, what is happening to them in Germany. But we weren't worried in 33 because we were in Czechoslovakia, in the most democratic country in the world. No, nothing like that can happen to us. And that was our big problem. Would we have known what is he going to do eventually? In 37, my father probably would have insisted to come to the United States. Nevertheless, he didn't. And in 1938, England and France noticed that this man Hitler is creating a huge army for Germany. And they began to wonder, what does he need an army for? World War I just ended. What is he going to fight? Who is he going to fight? What does he need the army for? So they decided they will question him. But before they even had a chance to question him, in Berlin, in Germany, an event happened where the German Nazi Party dragged all the Jewish people out of their homes. They humiliated them on the streets, made them perform scrubbing the sidewalks and all kinds of crazy things to do, and beat them and murdered about 200 of them. This event was called, anybody knows this event? Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass. That's right. And it lasted 3 days. And after 3 days, Hitler decided that the mothers, the women and the children can go back to their destroyed homes. They shattered everything, broke everything in their homes, but not the men. And they gathered about 20,000 of Jewish men and put them into the first concentration camp, which was called Dachau. Dachau is a huge concentration camp on the borders of a beautiful city of Munich. Well, these men, of course, never returned to their homes because these men were later murdered. Anyway, this was 1938, and now we began to worry. The stories were getting worse and worse in Germany, and as I say, England and France now was beginning to worry also, and so they decided to call a conference with Hitler and ask him what does he need the army for. Mr. Chamberlain of England and Mr. Daladier of France invited Mussolini from Italy and Hitler to discuss the matters, and when they questioned Hitler, why does he need this huge army? His answer was that part of Czechoslovakia, which is bordering with Germany, a territory that was called the Sudetenland, that this territory used to belong to Germany, and he wants to occupy this territory. He wants to reclaim it, and if Hitler allows him, if England and France allows him to do this, he will sign all peace treaties with England and France, and Europe will be safe from war, of course. Well, they did sign all these papers. England agreed. Today we question, did England even have the right to give away part of Czechoslovakia? Nevertheless, they agreed, and Hitler's army marched into the Sudetenland. Well, we know today that that's not what he really wanted. He wanted all of it, and about 2 months later, Hitler's army marched into the capital of Czechoslovakia, which was and is the city of Prague, and wiped Czechoslovakia off the map. Well, because of its location, Hitler also had a problem with Czechoslovakia. So he occupied all the way to the borders of Germany, occupied the Czech Republic and part of Moravia. But Slovakia and the Carpathians were bordering with different countries with which he had nothing to do yet. So he didn't know what to do with the rest of the country. He took the part of Slovakia, which was the middle part of Czechoslovakia, and he said to them, you're going to be a separate country now. You're going to be, I give you autonomy, you're going to be Slovakia, separate country. He put a Nazi government in there, and Slovakia became a country on its own, with the Carpathian, the very eastern corner, which was bordering with Poland and with Hungary and with the Soviet Union. He really worried about that region, but he had a wonderful partner there, Hungary. From the Austro-Hungarian monarchy, Hungary was his best friend. So he ordered Hungary to occupy this territory. And overnight, we became Hungarians. And needless to say, I was then 14 years old. I was worried, how am I going to go back to school? I didn't speak the Hungarian language. I went to Czech school before and spoke the Czech language. So I figured, well, I'm 14 years old, maybe I won't have to go to school anymore, which would have been okay with me. Nevertheless, we didn't know that Hungary, being the closest ally to Hitler, already had similar anti-Jewish laws as the Nuremberg laws were in Germany. And Jewish teachers were dismissed from the school system. And these teachers were trying to earn a living, so they opened little workshops in their homes. And those Jewish parents who could pay her some money would send their children to such a school. That's where I continued, went back to school. My brother had a bigger problem because my brother was already in his graduating class. And we were worried that he's not going to graduate. You see, in Europe, you go 5 years to elementary school, and then you go 8 years to gymnasium. And when you graduate from gymnasium, it is as if you would go 2 years to junior college in the United States. And this is a very important diploma, because in a gymnasium diploma, with a gymnasium diploma, those were the most difficult times for us. In the meantime, we didn't know that Hitler already had all of Eastern Europe. He occupied already Holland and Greece and Belgium, and we had no idea. And we didn't know that a war is going on. And so that was to our disadvantage, needless to say. Because as soon as Hitler had all of Western Europe, we knew he will have to come east. And the first country east was Hungary. And so now people were worried that maybe Hungary will be occupied by the Germans. But Hitler was much more aggressive. And he knew now that he's strong enough to deal with the Russians. And so he invaded Poland and occupied Poland. And now we could hear terrible stories. We could hear that Jewish people are being shot into mass graves. Old people, children. Again, do we believe this? Is it possible? I mean, can anybody do this without a rise of the whole world? We had no idea. Nevertheless, he occupies Poland in no time again, and now he invades the Soviet Union. And before we know, he's through the Ukraine, and in 1942, he's already near Stalingrad in White Russia. And now the whole world is worried. Hitler had no opposition from the Russians. They just let him march in like that. Well, what we didn't know, but the Russians did, that Napoleon lost the war in this region because of the winter, because his soldiers were not able to deal with the winter in this region. And so that's what the Russians were waiting for, luring the German army into this area. And when winter came, Hitler's army was in trouble. Not only were they not dressed for that kind of climate, but their weapons didn't work in that climate. And the Russians were waiting for him, and now they started to push Hitler out of the Soviet Union. And Hitler was beginning to worry. But Hitler had major problems in Russia. And one of those was that he was shooting Jews into mass graves, also in the Soviet Union, as he was marching in. But the bigger mistake he made was that in those same graves, he shot Soviet officers he captured in the war. And that's international law. You cannot shoot prisoners of war. And so Hitler knew that if they are discovered, he's in trouble. So he ordered his own army as they were being pushed out. Wherever you come across such a grave, dig it up, burn the bodies, rebury the ashes, don't leave such graves behind. The Russians were pushing fast, so there was no time for that. And by the time Hitler reached the Ukraine, the largest of these graves was in the Ukraine, in the city of Kiev, called Babi Yar. In Babi Yar, within 3 days, they murdered 16,000 Jews and about 9,000 Soviets. And so they were hoping that maybe they can all gather in Babi Yar and take care of this grave. But again, there was no time. And so today on Babi Yar, they have 3 huge monuments telling the story. But now we began to worry, because from the Ukraine, going back to Germany, Hitler's army has to pass our borders. So is Hitler going to pass our borders and go back to Germany, or is he going to stop and occupy Hungary? And now the Jewish people of Hungary were really in trouble and terrified. And Hitler's army reached our borders, and Hitler found out that the Hungarian president now was double-crossing him. His best friend double-crossed him because Hungary was now the only country in Europe which still had the Jews at home. And so Horthy figured that maybe he can convince the Allies that he was not a partner to Hitler, and the proof is that he's the only one who kept the Jews still at home. And Hitler finds out that this negotiation is already going on, and he's furious, needless to say, invites Horthy to Berlin, where he keeps him hostage while the German army marches into Hungary. And of course, at that point, we know we are doomed. But again, we only knew what we heard from rumors. We really didn't know what was going on. Well, Hitler's army marches into our city, and next morning our city is plastered with posters telling us that because the Hungarian Jews are still at home in good physical condition and the German army is in trouble, these Jews will be taken to Germany to help the army. And the questions what we're going to be doing were that we will harvest, producing food for the army, or we are going to work in factories producing war machinery. I was then 20 years old. This is 1944. April 1944. I just turned 20 years old. I go to my father and I'm asking him what he thinks. Does he trust Hitler? Does he really think this is going to happen? And my father says, yes, Hitler is in trouble. More than half of Germany is already occupied by the American and the English army. The Russians are on our borders already. He says, this war is over. He says, within 4 months, this war is going to be over and we will be back home. Well, that's how long needless to say, my father was. They packed us into cattle cars. We went to they took us to the railroad station, and we thought that we were going to Germany to help out the Germans, so we were looking for passenger trains, of course. There were no passenger trains anywhere. Cattle cars were waiting on the tracks, and they told us to pack in these cattle cars. And the Jewish people amongst themselves, of course, they were talking. We're going to help them out, at least they can take us in a regular train. But then the others said, no, Hitler is in such trouble that he needs all his trains now to gather from all over Europe his own army. And so he needs all the trains. And that's why we will have to travel on cattle cars. Well, the Jewish people, anything is reasonable. We packed into the cattle cars. The cattle car I was in, there was maybe about 120 of us. And there was no room to sit down, of course. There was hardly room to put our little suitcases on the ground. And by the way, when they told us that we can take a little suitcase with us, they told us the size of the suitcase and the weight of the suitcase. So we are now trying to see how we can manage this trip. Of course, we were not too worried because a journey from Hungary to Germany should be maybe 7-8 hours, so we will manage. I remember we got into the cattle car, it was packed, and I was in very good physical condition. I was an athlete and a gymnast before, and I had a few colleagues in the cattle car. So we were going to help out the old people. And we selected out all the old people and seated them at the edges of the cattle cars so they don't have to be standing. And we took children, babies out of the arms of mothers and place them into the laps of these elderly to make it a little more comfortable for everybody. And there was an empty bucket in the corner of the cattle car surrounded with a little bit of straw, so we figured that's for the old people, the bathroom, and they didn't give us any food or any water, so certainly it's going to be a very short trip. And they locked the cattle cars from the outside, of course, and the train moved. The train moved and we were a little bit anxious, but everything was reasonable. And the train moved and we traveled. We traveled 8 hours, 9 hours, 12 hours, we're still traveling. Where are we going? We should have been there a long time ago. No, the train moves into night, and in the middle of the night, finally the train stops, and everybody's relieved. Maybe finally we arrived to our destination, but they are not opening the cattle cars. On the doors of the cattle cars, the Nazi soldiers who are escorting our train are banging and yelling to us that if we are hiding any money or any valuables, any jewelry, gold, silver, we should give it up through the cracks of the cattle cars or we're going to suffer very serious consequences. Well, we are wondering, what are they talking about? When we left our homes, there was a place where we had to deposit all our monies and all our valuables. Nobody has anything. What are they looking for? Well, all of a sudden we hear shooting and screaming outside, and everybody's wondering what's going on. The children are crying, begging the parents to take them home. The children just want to go home. And we are wondering what is going on. Maybe they are searching people and maybe somebody is hiding some of that stuff and they found it and they are shooting them or killing them. Nobody knows anything, of course. This is going on for hours, shooting, crying, screaming. All of a sudden it's quiet and the train moves. And we are again on the way. Where are we going now? Well, we traveled 3.5 days, not knowing where we are, not knowing. Every night the train stopped and the shooting and the screaming is going on and we have no idea what's going on. Later, much later, we found out that this train was traveling all over Europe. In every country, the Jews were already packed in cattle cars, and those cattle cars were attached to our train. And that's where the shooting was, and apparently they found some people who were hiding some stuff or wanting to take, and that's why this was happening. Anyway, on the 4th day, the train stops, and through the cracks we see that it's daylight. This is the first time the train stopped at daytime, so I grabbed my sister. My sister was then 16 years old. I grabbed her hand and I said to her, we don't know where we are, we don't know what's going on here. You and I must stay together. Don't let go of my hand, no matter what happens. Don't let go of my hands. She started to cry. I said, don't cry, just listen to me and do what I'm asking you. The cattle cars open and everybody's jumping off. We jump off together again. As I jump off the train, I see that the train we arrived on doesn't have an end. You don't see the end of it. And thousands of people are pouring out of this train. Where are we? Who are all these people? Where did they come from? And I'm holding on strong to her, not to let go of me. She now yells to me, wait for Mother and Dad. I'm looking around in this crowd. How am I going to find mother and dad? Maybe they are still in the cattle car. So we go back to the cattle car. The cattle car is empty. Now I know that we're not going to find my parents in this crowd. So I'm telling her not to worry. When we get in, wherever they are going to take us, we will find them. And I try to make her understand that things will be okay. Now I hear on the loudspeakers yelling to us. We should leave our suitcases at the railroad station. Everything will be delivered to us. And we should obey orders and follow directions, because now we are going to be taken to a bathhouse to take a shower, to refresh ourselves after this long journey. Well, that sounds okay. We don't have to carry our luggage. We're going to be taking a shower. Really, we're going to feel much better after that. So maybe everything is going to be okay. And we are being pushed, but at the same time, I see Nazi soldiers marching up and down the railroad tracks, holding on to vicious dogs, teasing the dogs at the people pouring out of the cattle cars. And the dogs are biting, growling, barking. It's terror. The people are screaming, crying. What is going on? Where are we? What is this place about? And we, a group, is being pushed, hoping to the bathhouse. As we are being pushed, I suddenly see in the middle of the railroad tracks stands a Nazi officer, and when people come in front of him, he looks them over, and he decides who is going which way. And now I see that he's separating people, families or friends. He sends some people to the right of the railroad tracks, some to the left, some in other directions. Now I'm really worried. I have no idea where my parents went. Is he going to take my sister away from me? I am terrified. And we come in front of him, my sister and I, still holding on to each other, and he keeps looking at me and looking at her, and then he taps me on the shoulder and he says, points me to go. I look over my shoulders to see where he's directing me, and I see a huge group of young, healthy women. So I say, well, I'm going to the right group, but what does that mean? And something comes to my head. Maybe he's separating the people according to what kind of work they are going to be doing. And here they need young women, so we are going to the right place. So I'm moving towards it, but he stops my sister. He stops my sister, I stop. And he keeps looking again, looking at me, looking at her. Well, we look totally different. I am 20 years old. I'm in very good physical condition. I also happen to have long blonde hair and blue eyes, so he has no problem with me. My little 16-year-old sister looks completely different from me. She's skinny, in growing stages, skinny, tall, brunette, very dark brown hair, piercing black eyes, looks completely different from me. And he keeps looking at us, and then he taps me again on the shoulder, and again says, go, and I yell to my sister, run. And the two of us start running to the group I'm supposed to go, and he lets me go. And so now, I say to myself, oh, how lucky I am. Now we are together, we're going to the right group, everything will be fine. As I'm approaching the group, they are yelling back at me how lucky I was that I wasn't shot, and something about a Mengele. Mengele? What is a Mengele? Why would I be shot? What are they talking about? How would I imagine what they are talking about. Well, later, much later, I found out, of course, that this man who met every transport that came in here, and right there at the railroad station, he decided who is gonna die immediately, or who is gonna live another day, or maybe another week, and whose name is Dr. Mengele. Whoever could imagine that? Certainly not me. And it took me a little while before I found out what that really meant. And later on, unfortunately, I had 3 incidents with Dr. Mengele, which was much later. Anyway, now we are marching to the bathhouse, which is underground, and we go down into a dressing room where they tell us to get undressed. We should fold our belongings very neatly. We should tie our shoes together and remember exactly where we place our stuff, because when we come out of the shower, we will have to dress very quickly, because then we're going to be assigned to our work. Sounds okay. We walk into the shower room, we take a 1-minute ice cold shower, and then we are pushed out on the other side of the shower room into a clearing, not back to the dressing room, to a clearing where the Nazi soldiers with the dogs are waiting for us. We are naked, wet, it's late afternoon now, it's getting dark, the dogs are again biting, growling, snapping, screaming, people are devastated, terrorized. Nobody knows what's going to happen to us. Everybody now believes that we are doomed. We're going to die here. These dogs are going to rip us to pieces. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, a Nazi officer shows up and picks about 1,000 women from this group. Fortunately, I am with my sister in this first group, and they push us out and take us into one of these barracks that we saw on the way coming in. We saw barracks. I thought at the time that it's some kind of a German village. But then I couldn't imagine, because it was surrounded with barbed wires, and each row of barracks was divided with a row of barbed wires, so I couldn't figure out what that place was. But then I saw some prisoners, some male prisoners looking like skeletons, dressed in striped pajamas. So I figured out those must be some kind of prisoners in those uniforms, and then I figured maybe it is a prison. Maybe it's not a village. Maybe it's a prison, and then I couldn't imagine what kind of work they wanted me to do in a prison. They told me that I'm going to harvest or work in factories. So what am I doing here? So all this confusion in my head, worrying about my parents, holding on to my sister, I have no idea what is going on. And they take us into one of these camps where we staying outdoors, not telling us what to do, where we're going to live, are we going to get something to eat. This is 4 days without food or water. We had no water all this time, so we were hoping that at least they are going to give us some water. Nothing. They let us stay outdoors, outside of these barracks, and it's getting dark, it's nighttime, nothing still. All of a sudden, in the middle of the night, are 4 brick chimneys, which were in the 4 corners of this camp. Fire and smoke starts shooting to the sky becomes red. It looks like we are in hell. What is all this fire? That's how they are going to kill us now? We're going to die in this fire. Nobody seems to know. Where are we? What's going on? People are screaming, crying, talking. Devastation. And then one prisoner yells, "Don't panic. Look at those chimneys. Those must be the factories we're going to be working at." Now everybody starts talking to each other. Maybe she knows something we don't know. Maybe those are the factories. Maybe we will survive. Maybe it's going to be okay. Nobody knows nothing, needless to say. And daybreak comes. It's getting lighter and lighter, and all of a sudden, some overseers, whom we called the capos, arrived carrying clubs like baseball bats, and they came and they started to beat us, not telling us whether they want us to do something. They just started to beat us and pushing, shoving, pushing. What do they want from us? Why don't they tell us what they want from us? We'll do anything they want. They are yelling something in German, which sounds like Zehrappell. Now there is many of us who speak German, we never heard that word. So what does it mean? Nobody knows. Anyway, this pushing and beating is going on all day long, and we are preoccupied just saving ourselves. And now it's getting a little bit darker, it's late afternoon again, and my sister standing next to me starts crying and begging me to find out when we're going to be reunited with our parents. And now I'm looking around, and I realize what happened to us all day long. These capos were pushing us into lines of columns of 5. Long, long lines, thousands of us. And I see now we are standing in these lines, in these rows of 5s, and I'm trying to figure out who could I ask, when are we going to be reunited with our parents? Who knows it? If I don't know it, they don't know it either. The only one who could tell me was the capos. But do I dare walk out of this line and walk over to a capo who is having this club in her hand and beating us all day? Of course not. And then, as I'm looking around, one of the prisoners next to me says to me, "Do you know why they lined us up like this?" I said, "No. Do you?" She says, "Of course. Now they are going to bring the machine guns and they are going to wipe us out." And now I'm thinking, could she be right? Would it be the reason why they lined us up? And if it is true, why am I afraid to go over to her and ask her anything? And with a beating heart, needless to say, scared to death, I step out of the line and walk over to one of the capos, and very politely I ask her, does she know when we're going to be reunited with our parents? And she points to one of the chimneys and she yells at me, "You don't see the chimney and the fire and the smoke? There go your parents." What is she talking about? What kind of language is that? I mean, what does that mean? So I'm turning away from her, coming back to the line. She's crazy. I don't know what she's talking about. She yells at me, "Don't worry. When you go through those chimneys, you will be reunited." I will go through the chimneys? What does that mean? What is she talking about? How could I even imagine what those chimneys were and what that means that I'm going to go through the chimneys? We know now that 6 million of them went through those chimneys. We know that today. And so that's how my vacation in Auschwitz-Birkenau began. Well, you know, 71 years has passed since then. And every morning still, when I wake up, I question myself. How did I get out of that? Why am I still here? I just celebrated my 92nd birthday. Is it possible? Is this possible? And why me? Why me? Why not my beautiful 16-year-old sister? Why not my mother, who was the best mother anybody can have? Or my father, this wonderful man who everybody respected and loved? Why me? Why am I here? Well, as you can imagine, I have no answers. I have no answers, and that's why 30-some years, 39 or 40 years ago, I was approached by the Museum of Tolerance, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, and they asked me, would I tell my story about the Holocaust? And I asked myself, is that what I am alive for? Is that why I survived? That's why I was saved? Who knows? Of course we don't know, but in my head, I feel that maybe that's what I should be doing. And so I quit my business. I was a fashion designer with many, many awards. I had a very lucky life, and I don't understand it. And I dwell over it every day. Why? Why was I so lucky? I have a wonderful family. My work is in the museum. Why? Why was I so lucky? Well, I probably will never have an answer to it, but nevertheless, I feel that I should come and tell my story, not to scare people, but to explain to people that the world has not changed, that the horrible, horrible things are still happening today, every day in our lives, and that we are the ones who have to save this world with our actions, with our respect to other people, without understanding why we are here, that we all have some kind of a purpose here, and that we have to start thinking about it and trying to do the little good things that we can do for each other. Teach our children. Our children today are not learning anything. What they are learning is turning on the television and seeing how people shoot each other, how people kill each other. That's what they are learning. They are not even learning at home, and certainly not in the schools. Did I ever imagine that a child in the school can bring a gun and shoot 20 children? Could I ever imagine that when I was a child? Never. So why am I talking about the Holocaust? I keep hoping that maybe people will understand what is going on in the world today and what we all have to do to make this world a better place to live in, a safer place to live for our children. And so I'm very grateful to you coming today, listening to me. It's a great honor for me to be here and telling my story to you. And I hope that maybe you have some questions and maybe I can answer them. So thank you very much.
Could you stand up, please, and speak louder?
I said it's a beautiful and a touching life and a story, and you've given back to all of us by how did you escape? Do you remember any of that part, or do you care not to share that part?
Well, every day is an escape. Every day was an escape. Auschwitz was liberated on January 27th. It was liberated by the Soviet army. But on the 17th of January, the Germans already knew that the Russians have surrounded the camp. And so they lined us up on the 17th. And Dr. Mengele showed up. He selected all the people who looked weak or sick, and they were gassed immediately. And those of us who he thought can still walk were taken on death marches. And I was taken on such a death march for 3 days to another camp called LAL, which was in Upper Silesia, where I became a slave laborer. I worked in a factory producing snow chains for German tanks. Now, I wished then that I would have been left in Auschwitz, because then on the 27th I would have been liberated. This way I was not liberated until the very last day of the war, which was May 8, 1945. So that's how I survived. Yes.
What happened to your sister?
My sister and I were separated 6 months after we arrived to Auschwitz. And I was taken to a camp next to the camp we were in before. So every morning my sister and I would meet at the wires. By the way, the wires, the camp wires that were separating the camps were charged with high voltage electricity. So you couldn't go very close to it because then you were killed. But from a distance we would every morning see each other and wave to each other and say, "I'm still alive." On the day of Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish religion, she didn't show up. She didn't show up, and I didn't know why, of course, couldn't even imagine. I thought maybe she was taken away because there were transports constantly being taken to other camps. So that's what I thought was happening to her. And then, of course, when I was liberated, I was hoping that maybe she was liberated somewhere, she'll come back and we'll get together somehow. Well, she didn't. She didn't, and in 1994, Steven Spielberg was making a movie, The Last Days, which we did, and I was taken back to Auschwitz. And they asked me to go into the archives and see if I can find any document showing that I was there. And sure enough, I found my papers, I found my father's documents also, and I found my sister's documents. On her document, there was a stamp which said Hygienic Institute. Well, I had no idea what is Hygienic Institute. Next to it was a signature of a Dr. Munch. So I went over to the archivist and I questioned, what does that mean? I didn't see that on any other document. See, the archivist explained to me that there was this clinic in Auschwitz, which we didn't know when we were there, where they were doing experiments, medical experiments on women and children. And that my sister, it shows on the papers that my sister was taken to this clinic. So I kept asking him other questions, and he kept saying, I really don't know the answers. But he says, this Dr. Munch is alive. He says he lives in Munich. He says, I will give you his address, and maybe you write to him, and he will explain to you what happened to your sister. While I'm talking to the archivist, still the filmmaker who's filming all this comes over to me and he says, Renee, this is a miracle. He says, we have an appointment with Dr. Munch to be interviewed for the film. Next morning we fly to Munich. And the filmmakers go in and they tell the doctor that there is a woman out there who has a paper from your clinic, doctor, and she would like to ask you a few questions. Would you mind if she came in? And the doctor's wife says, she can't come in here. You don't bring her in here. I don't want her to come in here. So they come out and tell me that the doctor, I can't see the doctor, but after the interview, they will bring the paper in, they will show it to him, and maybe he will explain it to them. Well, the interview lasts 9 hours, and I'm sitting on the truck for 9 hours, waiting for the interview to be over. When the interview is over, James, the filmmaker, goes over to the doctor again, and he says, Doctor, this woman is sitting on this truck for 9 hours, waiting to just show you this paper which is from your clinic. It will take a few minutes to explain to her what it means. And so he says, well, okay, bring her in, but tell her if she's going to be provocative, if she's going to ask me questions I don't want to answer, I will walk out on her. And they come out and they warn me to be very careful what I say to him, not to upset the doctor. I walk to the door, and he is standing at the door and reaches for my hand. And I don't know whether you could even imagine what that means to a survivor, that a Nazi wants to shake your hand. I mean, this is unbelievable. And I'm wondering, does he really mean this, or what does he want to do? But he's standing there like this, so I reach for his hand, and I'm holding his hand, and I look up above him on the wall, and there is his picture, the Nazi doctor in the Nazi uniform, and next to it is Hitler's picture. Now this is 30-some years later. And I keep thinking to myself, he's still worshipping Hitler? And he wants me to be careful not to upset him? This will never happen. So he invites me in, and he was sitting on a bench while they were interviewing, and the cameras are still running, and he shows me a place next to him. I sit down on the bench, and immediately I want to ask him. Now I don't care. If he walks out on me, I don't care. Whatever comes to my head, I will ask him. And I turn to him very politely and smiling. I said, Doctor, they told me that you were the head doctor at the Hygienic Institute at the clinic in Auschwitz-Birkenau. He sits up very straight and he said, Jawohl, yes, very proudly. I said, well, they told me that all day long you were experimenting on Jewish children and women. I was wondering, when you came home, doctor, could you make love to your wife? He turns white, and I'm not waiting for an answer. I said, they tell me, doctor, that you have 2 children. You know, when my father used to come home from work, at the dinner table or the lunch table, we used to talk about his work. Did you ever talk to your children about your work? Again, I'm not waiting. I know that until he's not running, I'm going to be talking. I said, you know, maybe when you put them to bed, maybe you were telling them bedtime stories about your work. At this point, he jumps up. And he's turning, And now I grabbed the paper that I brought with me, and I shove it in front of him, hoping that his curiosity will take this paper from me. And sure enough, takes the paper, looks at it, and says, "Oh, that's my clinic." I said, "Yes, doctor." And on that paper is a few names, and I point to my sister's name, and I said, "And this was my sister, and I was wondering, doctor, what kind of experiments did you perform on her?" He sits back down, and he turns to me and he says, "We did only harmless experiments." Doctor, if you did only harmless experiments, why did she die? He has the nerve to turn to me and he says, "Oh, she didn't die in the experiments, but we couldn't send her back telling everybody what we are doing. We have to get rid of them. We shot her." That's how I found out. What? I didn't. I got up. And, I couldn't. I was devastated. I just got up and started walking out. Just couldn't manage it. By the way, this document is in the museum, in the Los Angeles Museum. Yes, I found out that my mother was taken from the railroad tracks straight to the gas chambers. She was directed with the old people, because she had white hair like me, directed with the old people and the children to the left, where a truck picked them up and took them straight to the gas chambers. So my mother never entered the camp. And my father was in Auschwitz for a little while. Then he was taken to 4 other camps, Mauthausen, Bergen-Belsen, one more, and wound up in Terezin, which was the model camp, where they brought the Red Cross to show how they treat the Jews. That was in Czechoslovakia. They built a special camp where they brought the Red Cross. When the Red Cross inquired how they are treating the Jews, they brought them to Terezin and showed them how well they are treated. And when the Red Cross left, they gathered all those people, brought them to Auschwitz and killed them. And so I found out that my father is in Terezin in the hospital. And we found him still alive. By the way, I found my brother first. 3 months after roaming around Europe, I ran into my brother. My brother escaped from the forced labor camps, from the Hungarian forced labor camps, escaped to Slovakia and became a partisan. But before he became a partisan, he had to acquire Gentile papers, because the partisans also hated the Jews. So he got his papers, he became a partisan and fought the Nazis till the end of the war. And 3 months after liberation, we ran into each other accidentally in Budapest. And we found out that my father is alive. So then we traveled to Terezin and found my father still alive, but unfortunately he died 4 months later, so he didn't survive. Yeah. Yes. Okay. Go, Sarah.
Hi. I think for me, climate change is the biggest global issue of our time, and I know a quote that says, climate change is an environmental problem like World War II was an environmental problem. Like, yes, World War II was bad for carbon pollution, but it was also a national security problem. It was also an economic welfare problem. It was a public health problem and a human rights problem. So going back to what you said about us needing to be the voice today, not tomorrow, how do we mobilize our fellow countrymen and women to act in the name of social justice and environmental justice today?
I tell you that it has to be done, and then I leave it up to you to figure out. You organize your group. Each one organize your own groups. And do as much as you can. Very little, nobody expects you to save the world, but to save part of the world, or have some people who are willing to work towards that. Yes?
First of all, happy Pesach.
Thank you
Passover.
very much. Same to you.
My question is, when you were liberated from the camp, did they take in any of the surrounding German civilians and show them how they treated you in the camp?
Well, the camp I was in at the time, in Libau, had only 200 women. It was a small working camp. And by the time we woke up on the day of liberation, the Nazis were gone. The Nazis knew that the war is over. We didn't. And so we stayed indoors because we realized that we were not called for roll call. And they didn't call us for roll call, something must be going on. And then one prisoner ran out and realized that the Nazis were gone. So kept yelling to us, Nazi kaput, Nazi kaput. And there was also a French male prison next to us, another working prison with French men. And they were already marching around the camp, signaling us that the war is over, everything is okay, we can come out. And that's how we found out the war is out.
Wow.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much.
Very brave, and unfortunately, there's not too many left to
Yes,
tell their stories.
that's true.
Stories are so important. My question is, I would want to know, what happened to this doctor? Why was he held accountable? Why didn't Israel intervene?
Well, he was. When the Russians invaded Auschwitz, they set up a tribunal right there in Auschwitz, and there were 5 doctors that were tried, and they were accused of not of killing, but that they were collaborating with the Nazis. And so the Russians decided that these 5 doctors still were helping the prisoners in the camp. They didn't know what they were doing really, and they should be denazified. And so Dr. Munch was taken to the Soviet, to Russia, to a Soviet camp, where he was 4 years in camp. And then he came back to Munich and practiced medicine. Yeah. Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like once you were liberated? And you had no place to go, no family you knew of. What happened?
Well, that's exactly what happened. A Russian soldier, by the way, a Russian high-ranking officer with 4 big stars on his shoulders rode in on a horse into our camp. And he saw these women surrounding him, and he yelled in Russian, "Евреи, Jews?" And we got scared. Why does the Russian care if we are Jews? The Germans ask you whether we are Jews. What does the Russian want to know about it? And nobody answered him. And he yelled again, "Евреи?" And somebody said, yes, we are Jews. This officer jumped off his horse, came around the women, started to hug the women, started to cry, and then straightened up and hitting his chest was yelling to us, "Я тоже еврей, I'm also a Jew." And at that point, of course, we realized that we were liberated by a Jewish Russian officer. And he helped us getting out of there. He told us not to leave right away because the Russians are looting and raping, and he put a guard in front of our camp, and he told us he'll be back when it's okay for us to leave. And he came back a few days later telling us it's safe to go. And then we just walked. And later on we tried to hitchhike, took big chances. We went to the railroad stations and asked the conductors to let us sit on the coal, on top of the coal, or we even stopped Russian trucks and asked them to pick us up. Big chances. It was really a very, very serious situation after the war for us. Until I reached Budapest 3 months later, and we found out there is a school where the survivors sign in case somebody is looking for them. And in that school, coming out of that school at the door, I ran into my brother who was coming in to do what I was going out to do. Yes, it was Bashir, yes.
Well, we'll
Thank
be
you
on
so
the
much.
side.